Our text today is a narrative text. In other words, it records a set of events. It tells us a story from which we can then deduce certain principles that we can apply in our life. And so in this story, in this narrative, there's a worthless man called Sheba. And you know why he's worthless? He's worthless because he's full of selfish ambition. He wants to be king in David's place. He is envious of David's position. And so he lifts up his hand against King David and he makes himself guilty of treason. And so, as you can imagine, King David sends out his men against Sheba, and the commander appointed is one Amasa. But there is a problem because Amasa is killed by another worthless man, Joab, who takes his place. Now, why did Joab kill Amasa? Well, because Joab had bitter jealousy towards Amasa, because King David had replaced him as commander with Amasa. And so Joab has selfish ambition. He wants to take back his place. He wants to be commander at all costs. And so he kills Amasa in a most dastardly manner and takes his place and becomes the commander of David's men, but by illegal means. So stand back with me for a moment. You have in our story, as it develops, one worthless man, Sheba, who is now fleeing from another worthless man called Joab. Both men deserve death, and as Sheba flees, he flees all the way to a fortified city called Abel Beth Makah. I'll just call it Abel. He locks himself up there with his men and the inhabitants of the city. So Joab does what any good ancient commander would do. He builds a siege ramp. And they start to wreak havoc, destruction against the wall in order to topple the wall. That's now David and his men under the command of Joab. If you were by chance living in that city under siege, you would agree that there is a serious problem. Obviously, you did not ask for Sheba to choose your home city as his hiding place. No luck in that. But it will only be a matter of time before David's men break through the wall. And when they get in, they will, in all probability, kill all the inhabitants, together with Sheba and his men. So it's serious if you're living in the city. It's a situation of great worry, and one with seemingly very little hope. But then we have this shining moment. I love it in the text, in the narrative. There appears on the city of the wall a wise woman. And she speaks to Joab and asks him, why does he want to destroy the city, which is a place of wisdom, a mother to other cities, and part of the inheritance of the Lord? Why would he want to destroy something so special? And Joab answers that he's only looking for Sheba. He has no beef with the city, that if they handed Sheba over, then he and his men would leave the city alone. You have to love this moment in the text. The wise woman says to him, behold, this head will be thrown to you over the wall. Imagine that. She must have been the Margaret Thatcher of the ancient world. She consults with her people, and Sheba's head is cut off and it's thrown over the wall. And Joab and his men leave and the city is saved. You see, the wise woman has intervened between these two worthless men who are both filled with selfish ambition and envy. And by doing that, she has saved a city. Many have been saved. The only person to die is, of course, Sheba, who deserved it. Now, I believe her wisdom was heavenly wisdom. And the Apostle James gives us a description of heavenly wisdom, and I use that to make my conclusion. And this is what he says. James chapter 3 says that the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. The wisdom I believe the woman had was heavenly wisdom and fits with that definition or description. But the Apostle James goes further. There is more. He also describes worldly and demonic wisdom, And I believe that's what Joab and Sheba had. And he describes worldly demonic wisdom as follows. If you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, just like Joab and Sheba did, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. The sad thing of the world is that heavenly wisdom is very scarce. And worldly and demonic wisdom, in inverted commas, of course, that wisdom, because it's not really wisdom, is commonplace, unfortunately. So I've shared the narrative with you and I've explained the principles, and so now I want to move to some practical application from our text, and I want to share some brief thoughts for you to consider, to reflect on. So I've got 5 points and then I'll close. First point briefly is to suggest that women cannot give good leadership is simply absurd. It's also unbiblical. You have just heard of a good example of female leadership. A wise woman can give the leadership that saves a city. There it is in the Bible. Just as a wise man can give leadership that saves a city. The true marker for good leadership is therefore not gender, but wisdom. We must stop measuring people on physical attributes. We keep doing it. We must stop. We must start to measure people on what is on the inside, on godliness, whether they have good works, whether they are humble, whether they seek Him above all things. That's what we should measure. Surround yourself, I suggest, with godly people, because if they are the people that surround you and provide you with advice, it's good to remember that wisdom follows such people, and you would most probably be the beneficiary of such. My second point, conflict is part of life. And people always want to avoid it, but it's part of life. Conflict has been going on between people and nations from the very beginning. Look at the 4th chapter of the Bible, Cain and Abel. You see, you can try to run from it, conflict, but you can never hide from it. You have to face it, because conflict is part and parcel of our existence. You find it in marriage, in workplaces, in families, in churches, in society. It's everywhere. And maybe today there is conflict in your very own life that you have been avoiding. Maybe you've been hoping that it would go away. But my question to you is, will you be brave and climb onto the city wall to face that conflict? Will you be brave and do that? My third point, we really need to start speaking. The wise woman spoke up. We will not meaningfully resolve conflict unless we start to communicate. You see, you have to push back against that which will hurt you or your family. You have to push back against disorder coming in, against damage coming in to your collective, to your space, to your family, to your church. You have to enter into the arena of conflict and push back, avoiding the arena of conflict in the hope that things will go away is no strategy at all. It's simply risk-taking. And so I think when we're talking about diplomacy, peacemaking, conflict resolution, we have to face the reality that we need to speak up. We have to speak. Fourthly, we really need to start speaking with heavenly wisdom. Because I've just told you to speak up, but it doesn't help you speak up with worldly wisdom. That's going to help you nothing. It's going to cause greater trouble for you. We have to speak with heavenly wisdom, otherwise it's dangerous. So you might tell me all out of heavenly wisdom. You don't even know how to deal with the situation. You've tried to figure it out. Well, if you don't have heavenly wisdom, then the Bible tells you simply, and very simply, very matter of fact, the Bible says ask for it and you'll get it. James 1 verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. You see, as you have heard, there are two types of wisdom. There's heavenly wisdom, and then, of course, there is earthly or demonic wisdom. This wise woman was filled with heavenly wisdom. Ask for heavenly wisdom. Ask that God may use you to resolve conflicts everywhere you go and to be a peacemaker, to avoid escalating conflict, and to be the humble one who brings peace where there is discord and pain and suffering. Finally, my fifth observation, sometimes to resolve conflict, you must make tough decisions. And I think that's why people avoid conflict as well, because they actually know that, well, there's a tough decision that has to be made. There has to be some violence to protect the group against an individual who's bringing disorder and pain and suffering. A head has to roll, or heads have to roll, or have to fly over city walls, if we can put it in the narrative's terms. One individual can draw upon a family, a church, a workplace, or a city great trouble. Like Sheba did to the city of Abel. It didn't ask for that. He arrived and then he drew upon that city trouble, violence. In the same way, for example, if your child is an addict or abusive at home, you have to apply tough love. You have to set boundaries and keep those boundaries, and it's going to be a tough decision and difficult to keep to, but you have to do it. If your spouse is abusing you, you may have to move out of the home temporarily, or you might have to get a family violence interdict. Tough decision to make, but you might have to do it. If you're mixed up with wrong people, you may have to break it off with them, exit a business deal and cut your losses. You may have to ask an individual to leave the church, as I have had to do before. Because sometimes conflict and its resolution has hidden within it tough decisions that have to be made. Our God is a God of order. And heavenly wisdom does not avoid the tough decisions. I say that again. Heavenly wisdom does not avoid the tough decisions. So I close now with these thoughts. Jesus is the great peacemaker. Think about that. He is the ultimate peacemaker. There was this war between God and man. And mankind, as you know, is sinful and self-seeking. And the wrath of God rests upon it for that. And so Christ spoke to the Father on mankind's behalf, on our behalf. And Christ was humble and peace-loving and considerate and submissive and full of mercy and good fruit and impartial and sincere as a man walking on earth. And he spoke to the Father, he prayed. And he did not ask that you and I be punished for our sins and for our treason. We were like Sheba, full of treason. He did the unthinkable. It really is the unthinkable. He took the tough decision, evidenced by drops of blood as sweat, to die in our place, to take God's righteous judgment for our treason upon himself. And this decision that he took didn't make sense. It was a stumbling block to the Jews and folly to the Gentiles. Not wise according to their thinking. And why? Because their thinking is worldly wisdom, because they're self-seeking. But by his decision, by his intervention, the conflict between man and those who follow Christ was resolved. By his intervention, we have been redeemed and saved. And so all I can say is that Jesus was not just full of heavenly wisdom. Jesus is heavenly wisdom. He is heavenly wisdom. Whatever your situation may be, may you be as the wise woman was. May you climb onto your city wall and intervene. And may it be so that you are given the strength to make the tough decisions, if there are any. And may it be so that you be flooded with heavenly wisdom, and that by the presence of Christ himself through the Spirit in your heart. May God bless you so. Amen.